a playlist original.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Back to the Blockbuster with your host Gaius and Jackson. It's our very first anniversary episode of 2025. Well, I guess we did closer in early.
Oh yeah,
That was still
okay.
January, but that was a
Kind of doesn't
2024
count.
release.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it was a holdover from 2024. So this is our first movie that we're doing from 2025 that was in our anniversary list for January. And I ended up picking this particular film. Well, it was twofold. I will be honest with the first part. I'm doing the anniversary list, and January was a bleak month for anniversaries on our end.
True
I
that.
I had Jackson look at it too, and I was like, if you see anything that you want to do, just throw it at me. And he didn't throw anything at me. And I'm going down the list, and I'll be honest with you, I'm typing it up and like looking at, I'm on my iPad and my phone and like on different sites, like trying to get like all the anniversaries like down in our little Google Drive sheet. And there are a lot of websites that I go to. We have a main one, but it didn't have all of them listed, and I knew there had to be some missing. And one of the last ones that I added to the list was Higher Learning, which came out on January 11th, 1995. So that makes it 30 years old. It was the only one that popped out to me because I hadn't watched it in a really long time. And I think what I wanted to kind of look into with like looking at it again was not just looking at it in the context of like the movie itself, but also looking at it in the context of what it meant for John Singleton's career at that time. John Singleton, as a lot of people know, directed Boys in the Hood, and I think we talked about it on the show with like different directors who come out of the gate swinging with a really big movie that resonates like that. I mean, John Singleton was nominated for Best Director for Boys in the Hood. His screenplay was nominated. I believe he was the youngest, might still be the youngest director to be nominated at 24. For Boys in
Yeah,
the Hood.
I know he was the first Black director nominated for an
Yeah,
Oscar in directing, which I just found that out, which is crazy. I had no idea how
crazy.
young he was at the time he made that, and even this Higher
Yeah,
Learning. So until recently, so like really impressed at what he's been able to put out at that age. Like he's now at the time he made this movie, he is the same age I am now, and I just think to already have Boys in the Hood in 4 years before this came
like
out, I'm
this.
just thinking about that. That's crazy.
Yeah,
That
and
was young.
I wanted to look at it that way. And John Singleton had that kind of career. I think, even though a lot of people remember him fondly as a director, I think he had a hard time living up to that promise that he kind of established with Boys in the Hood. And it's one of those things where a lot of his movies that came afterwards, with the exception of maybe a couple, weren't really like as warmly received as that movie when they came out. But later down the line, people kind of saw them in a different light. After Boys in the Hood, he does Poetic Justice, which is another kind of like hood movie, but told from like the
Okay.
female perspective. Told from like, that was Janet Jackson's film debut, and he wanted to tell a story about where he grew up, similar to Boys in the Hood, but that was told from the women's perspective that were growing up, who had to deal with the men who were in gangs and doing all that kind of stuff. So that's what Poetic Justice was about. And
Okay.
then when he does Higher Learning, you can tell that he is trying to expand on stories that he was telling with those first two movies. Maybe doing a little bit something that is like a little bit more racially diverse, but still touching on the issues that
Right.
he touched on in those first two movies. It's a bit more ambitious than his first two movies in terms of like its scope and the story he's trying to tell.
Right.
And I wanted to see if my feeling on it had changed, because I remember in the times that I've watched it, I think the last time I watched it, man, was over, maybe it was like 15 years old. Like, it was a long time ago since I watched it.
Right. I know this
And
wouldn't have been one that you would have seen in theaters, right? Because of how
no, I didn't. I
yeah.
was too young, and like, definitely my mom would have seen it, but I don't think she
Right,
would
right,
have
right.
thought to taking me to go see it. And I remember at the time, like, even the last time I watched it, I remember thinking like, God, this is a really ambitious movie. It has a lot of strong like things going
Mhm.
on with it, but it almost felt like he couldn't quite grasp all the things that he was trying to do. Like, maybe he was doing too much at once, and I want to see if my perspective on it had changed in that time.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what we're going to get into a little bit when we
Right on.
jump into talking about the movie. I did want to give people a little bit of a synopsis about it. Basically, the film follows the changing lives of three incoming freshmen at the fictional Columbus University. We have three basically main characters. Malik Williams, played by Omar Epps. He's a track star who struggles with academics. Kristen Connor, who's played by Kristy Swanson. She's a shy and naive girl trying to find her place at school. And then there's Remy, played by Michael Rapaport, who is a lonely and confused person himself, who's also seemingly out of place in a very new environment. The movie was financially successful. It made $38.3 million. But I think it has a 45% on Rotten Tomatoes. So it wasn't as
Ooh,
warmly
okay.
received as even Poetic Justice or definitely Boys in the Hood. But what it does get credit for, and I actually read a retrospective. It was hard to find anyone writing about it in the last few years or so, but one person did, and he was saying that yeah, this movie really probably resonated a lot with all of its themes of racial inequality and also gender
Mhm.
inequality and all that, but a lot of it feels like it could resonate today still. And I don't necessarily know if that's a good thing or bad thing, but a lot of it really, when I was watching it for this, rang so much true uh, and experience that still goes on today. And I
Mhm.
think that is maybe why the movie, for some people, still holds a place in their heart, because it's like, oh, this, it's been 30 years since it came out, and yeah, a lot has changed, but sadly, a lot hasn't changed.
It's that
And
age-old saying, right? The more things change, the more they stay the same. And that was something that I was thinking while watching. And I went in. I'll get into my experience with it a little bit later, but I went in with no expectations, and it was funny. One of the things I remember thinking throughout was like, it's sad about how topical this movie still is in 2025. Obviously, I think it takes things a little bit to the extreme, like
yeah,
with
yeah,
its themes and stuff, like a little bit on the nose in some places. But generally, what John Singleton is getting at and what he's putting the spotlight on in this movie is still rampant in the United States, and where I'm at in Canada too. We still see like issues like that are presented in this film, and so that was for a movie that just turned 30. It's crazy how relevant it still could be.
yeah. And and there's some things that we can touch on when we talk about uh, plot points. But one of the things I saw brought up I read a few reviews on IMDb from people that really didn't like, and what you can kind of see with the user reviews on IMDb is, depending on the year they wrote it, their review, it's either really, really positive or it was really negative. And it seemed like the further we got into the 2010s, 2020s, like later, the reviews got a
Yeah,
little bit more negative, especially in its perception of how they felt how John Singleton wrote the white characters in the movie. Like they really felt that he wrote them to be kind of a little on the nose evil, is what the
I
criticism
read
was.
that in reviews, and I didn't really feel that for the most part. I feel like people think of the white characters as the neo-Nazi characters that we
See,
see.
yeah,
There's lots of white characters that are not portrayed that way at all. And I've
yeah,
heard that called out too, but I think that's an interesting thing that people are like sticking to. That's I don't agree
yeah,
with it, but in any case, I thought
yeah.
he
No,
actually did a pretty objective
uh,
job of showcasing different like the white and black characters like pretty
right,
objectively, like negative and positives on both sides, without
yeah.
villainizing. I mean, the neo-Nazis are villainized, but even
It's
then,
gonna be
Michael
hard
Rappaport's,
not.
well, yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Even Michael Rappaport's character is handled like quasi
Well,
sympathetically, I would say. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And when I watched it the first time that I can actually remember, it was I had seen Boys in the Hood already, so and that was I don't want to say changed my life, but it was a really important
Yeah, I
movie,
love that
and
movie.
I love it too. And even though I grew up here in the beach cities, my mom actually grew up where they shot that movie.
Oh,
That's where her childhood was, and
okay.
so she was the first one to show me that film, and I just watching how it resonated with her.
Yeah.
Um, it just adds an extra layer of oh, this is how real that story is for a
Oh,
lot of people.
100%. And
And
John Singleton grew up there. Like that is very
there,
much like
yeah,
his life. So and it feels very authentic. That's what I love about
yeah.
that movie.
And I think that's why that movie works the best of his, because it's such a lived experience for him,
Right.
and that's why it feels so powerful. And so I first saw this movie pretty much in a row with a few of his other ones. It was like a
Okay.
poison, it was Boys in the Hood, Poetic Justice, in the order pretty much that they came out. I think at that point
Nice.
it was Higher Learning, and I think Rosewood was the last one at that
Okay.
point that I had available to me. And you know, I I I remember Boys in the Hood sticking out the most, of course. And Poetic Justice has moments that I think work, but this one intrigued me because I felt even then I was like, God, there's so many ideas here, but it feels like there's so much going on that he can't quite like pinpoint all the points that he's really trying to make, like really put a button on them. And like, he clearly is writing a story that means something to him as well in a different
Right.
way, even if it's not really like such a lived experience as Boys in the Hood. I mean, I think at the point when he made this movie, he's still, I'm thinking about him in Hollywood in the sense where he
Yeah.
is making black films, but then he's also in an industry that is also very white, and also having to you know get involved in that melting pot himself and
Right.
feeling comfortable in a melting pot of people. So that's how I kind of
As a
thought of Higher
20
Learning at the
something year
time.
old guy, like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
not
yeah,
easy. Yeah.
yeah.
Couldn't have been easy.
And that's how I remember thinking like, oh, this is like it could be a great movie, but it's only like at the time I was like, oh, it's only good because it feels like there was just so much happening, and I
Yep.
thought certain stories were underserved in it. And when I watched it for this, I wrote a letterbox review for it, and I still kind of feel the same way. But there's so many moments in it that are so strong that I
Mhm.
can now forgive, uh, maybe throwing so much and seeing what sticks. I guess.
Mhm.
That like that. I think his intentions are in the right place. His heart's in the right place, and I think that's what makes the movie ultimately work for me. And like when I watched it last night, I caught myself again judging certain things like, oh, I wish that moment had a little bit more time to breathe. Like this character disappears for way too long, or like this character doesn't like
Right.
have as much focus as the other characters. But then like a strong moment would happen, and I would just be taken out of that and be like, no, maybe I should just like
You kind of like
live in these
forgive
moments. Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah. So as a
yeah.
first
So
time
that's kind of
viewer,
where I was at. Yeah,
I agree with how it seems like you felt about it and even still kind of do feel about there are a lot of plot lines and just characters that are juggled throughout this movie and some I would say maybe are handled like just a little bit better than others and it's I wouldn't like necessarily he's a sophomore filmmaker at the point that he made Higher Learning so I think that's he still
yeah,
pulled off a pretty impressive feat by making this. And a lot
yeah,
of what I was doing while I was watching Higher Learning was I was comparing it again. So I guess I'll just take this chance and kind of explain
yeah.
my exposure to it. I had never, I knew John Singleton pretty much only through his second Fast and Furious movie and Boys in the Hood, which I absolutely adore. And I'm so glad that I don't even, I've watched Boys in the Hood a few times, but I just kind of threw it on because I knew of its legacy when I was younger. And I'm so glad I did because I that's a movie that I now like. It resonates with me because I've seen it when I was, I think, at the right
Right.
age to see it. It's a coming of age story, and I watched it when I was young, and I love revisiting it. So that's how I knew
Yeah,
John Singleton. I didn't know much about his career, so I was excited when I saw that he directed this that you had suggested it. But I didn't watch the trailer. I didn't do any digging on it. I actually watched it like right before we recorded this, so I didn't have the
yeah,
time to even like do any digging. And I love doing that because you get to go into a movie completely blank. It's just something I don't do all the time. But back to my point is I kind of was interpreting it as like a dazed and confused like type,
yeah,
like Richard Linklater's. And I love that movie to death too. So I kind of thought, is this like just gonna be like a hangout movie, but on like a college campus, like with some like John Singleton type themes laced throughout? And that's how like I'd say the first maybe like third of the movie was kind of coming across to me.
yeah,
And I think like in the same capacity as like Days of Confused is a hangout movie that involves a lot of different characters interacting with each other and mingling in their high school and their social groups, which a lot of Higher Learning has. Richard Linklater's been a director for a lot longer at the time that he made Days of Confused than John Singleton was when he made Higher Learning. So it's not exactly fair to compare those things. So I think like for a relatively young filmmaker, juggling all these storylines and characters, John Singleton does a relatively fine job with it. But I agree, there is a lot going on, and some storylines get resolved maybe a little bit cleaner than others.
Right.
But I think I feel the same way you might have did when you saw it back in the day.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with you too that it does feel like a hangout movie during the first
Yeah,
like third of the movie, because like
it
everyone's feeling it.
definitely changes, but it had
Yeah,
that DNA, I think.
yeah, and like you can tell there's underlying tension though. Like it's established pretty early on. When the security guards, I think when Remy stops one of the security guards to break up the party because they have class the next day, and it's most of the black students are having the party,
Right.
and you learn early on that like the security guards clearly treat the black students a little very differently than
Yeah.
the white students, and it's something that Ice Cube plays a character named Fudge, who I love. That at first I was laughing that he basically is like an extended senior at this college, but
Yeah.
what made that character important later on is that he has this experience of being there, and is much different from Malik in the sense that like he's a freshman, and he has all this kind of like, as the movie goes on, all this anger, like that he believes he's kind of entitled to, and someone like Fudge is there to explain to him like, yeah, it's cool to have that anger, but like know exactly where it's coming from, and
Right.
what it kind of all means in the grand scheme of things. Like, it's later in the movie, but when they have the fight with the skinheads and like how angry, like, I always forget Busta Rhymes is in this movie too, like Busta Rhymes character
Yeah.
is, and how angry Malik is, and then when like uh Ice Cube's character basically has to like kind of break it down to him that like one fight that we won doesn't change like all this many 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 years of like kind of like the
Right.
way that they oppressed us. And like I think that having an older but young character like that in the movie was important.
Yeah.
I know it like kind of it started out like it's set up as like a joke that he's been there forever, but I think in the long run that's why that character is ultimately important, because he offers like, I think he's one of the only students that offers that perspective to any of them, of like
Definitely.
knowing exactly what goes down at that school.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to ask you, because a lot of I was texting my friend who had actually watched it 2 weeks ago randomly,
Oh, wow.
and he was just like told me the one thing that bothered him that he felt was heavy handed, but he's like, I feel bad because like I'm white, so maybe I didn't get it. But he's like the actual like tension between like them meeting their roommates for the first time, who like when Kristen meets Regina King, who's her roommate, and that it's kind of awkward. They have that whole conversation like, oh, where are you from? And she's like, oh, I'm from Orange County. And she's like, oh, is that near
Right.
Compton? And she's like, no, that's near Disneyland. And then Omar Epps has the one with Wayne, who like leaves his room a mess and
Right.
all that kind of stuff. And then of course Remy has his tensions with his initial housemates before he leaves. Like, do you think that was like too on the nose, too heavy handed, or was that kind of like an accurate way to kind of portray like there is, even though like the first third of it feels like a hangout kind of fun movie, I
Yes.
thought having those moments presented that there will be some kind of escalating tension because of these differences of, not that necessarily that these characters have, but like that is kind of what the basis of what the story is
Right.
going to be.
It did provide a good basis, like considering how the story unfolds later, but not knowing where the story was going or quite like what these tensions would boil into. I kind of thought like the tensions were relatively like harmless, especially between like Remy and his initial roommate is Fudge, is it not?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So I thought, okay, like at worst, these guys are just gonna, maybe not associate a whole lot together, but clearly they're gonna run around in like similar groups, and maybe they just won't like, be the tightest of friends or anything. But looking back now, like yeah, it was a good setup for like where Remy's character goes. I will say maybe it's a little bit on the nose, like maybe could have been done a little subtler. I guess I like what I think is like the best example and what was handled well between Remy and Fudge is him like going to kind of like not intentionally trying to like initiate this interaction with the security and Fudge and
yeah,
his guys, but like just because he genuinely has an issue, like he wants the party to be shut down because he's got class, and you can
yes, yeah,
sympathize with that reason. But then his inadvertently kind of leading that interaction and like the racial tension that then sets up, and Remy kind of being the catalyst for that, was a great foundation for like where those characters go. Their like one-on-one interaction when Fudge comes home and like just blares the music and stuff, that felt kind of like, all right, like we
yeah,
very much we're getting what John Singleton is trying to say with those characters. But there's lots of
yeah.
interactions that I thought were way more subtle and believable, I guess.
Yeah, I thought so too. I mean, I do love what it sets up. There was another thing I read too, that there was some people that thought that they wrote the white characters too kind of evil and kind of caricature, and there were other people that thought they wrote the black people like that too, where it was just like, hey, why are they so like angry? Like like when you're watching the first part of it, like almost anyone would be, if they had class the next day, would be upset that like there is a rager going on in their place with like at least 30 people. I mean, there was some packed party, right? And some of the stuff I read is that some of the black people have so much anger already and hostility, and maybe that's where they don't understand where it was coming from. But I guess, and I don't know if it's just not written as well as it could be, but I think a lot of black people feel that hostility already. Then they're in a place of like, we have to be on the defensive because of what they're used to. And I think that is what he was trying to say a little bit with how they react to certain things. So maybe it wasn't as well written as it could have been, but I think that's what the attempt was there, to kind of suggest that they are that hostile because they're used. I think that's why they use the example of like, well, you're telling us to shut down, but why aren't you telling the kids down there to shut down? When he said who was playing the like hillbilly music downstairs, and
I thought that scene was great.
Yeah, and then it gets brought up again when there's a whole incident where I think it was between like the frat, or there's like a fight, and you have all the black students standing on one side and the white students standing on the other, and he's telling them that they need to leave. To the black students, he's like, well,
it's after Remy points the gun at
the gun, right,
exactly.
So like, and he's like, well, why do we need to leave? Like, why don't you tell them to leave? And the guy only tells the white students to leave because he knows that's what he has to do in order to get them to leave. So I think I think that hostility is what they were trying to convey, is that, hey, we're used to this already, right? But it does kind of come out of nowhere in the film. Like, they don't really like kind of like I guess essay it as well as they could.
Right. Sometimes it's showcased really well and believably, and you don't really have to get like that explanation of to why. And then sometimes it does appear to be kind of random. And I guess my guess would be like, maybe because John Singleton probably puts a lot of his experiences into the characters in this movie. And so that might come across. It might be difficult to have to explain if you're not looking at it from the other angle, right? Like when that is your experience, it might appear obvious to him. And maybe when he watches the movie or edited the movie or whatever, it comes across very obviously because that he's been in those shoes. But like from other audience members that might not get the nuance, it might not have come across totally concisely every single time. But I thought it was fine. It didn't really take me out of the movie by any means. And on that note too, just about this movie, I noticed, or I learned rather more than noticed, because I didn't know this about him at the time, but it seems his first three movies were very much reflections of his own life at the time that he made them. Being a youth growing up in South Central LA and Boys in the Hood, and I guess what's like the setting? What's the second movie? You said it was Poetic Justice.
So Poetic Justice is basically the same setting as Boys in the Hood, but just told from like a female perspective. Like, you have a female lead character, and like basically it's about her experience like living in that environment, and he knew women like that and girls like that. So
100%, that would have been
so he could write them well.
Definitely.
I think the problem with Poetic Justice, I know we're not talking about that movie. Like, a lot of people don't like at the time they were expecting another Boys in the Hood, and it's not really that. It does have moments of that are similar, but it's a much softer movie than Boys in the Hood, because it's told from a woman's perspective, and I don't think that they were expecting that at the time when it came out. But that's a good point that you made, that the first three movies especially seem to be like what he was living in, like the age range that he was in. Like, he was like in the perfect place to kind of tell these stories because he was kind of living it.
And he was fresh out of university himself at the time that he made Higher Learning, which these would have been experiences that he had just gone through. He would have been really intimately familiar with like college and university lifestyle and interactions. And again, I think like he plays some of these themes to the extreme ends. Like, I don't think some of the characters and themes in this movie are absolutely like pretty true to life, and then some are very much Hollywoodized. Like, I did get a Hollywood feeling to some things, a very cinematic feel, like especially to the skinhead stuff. And I don't know if that was maybe because like maybe John Singleton, I don't know much of his filmography prior to this. I guess Poetic Justice being the one that I hadn't seen, but if that was just maybe something that came with like working with various demographics for the first time, maybe as like cast members and characters in a movie, if that's how he felt he had to do it. If
Yeah,
I'm not really exactly sure, but overall,
I
I
want.
think like he did well with everything that he had to juggle in this movie.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you. This is probably easiest to break it down by each person. The one
Mhm.
character that I even still watching it now, even though it's not her fault, I think Kristy Swanson does a good job in the movie.
Mhm.
By the way, the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer in the film.
I was glad you brought it up because I was going to ask you about that, but
Yeah. I think her character is the one that kind of gets shortchanged the most of the three. Um,
okay.
like I believe what happens to her, and like I know I know he's trying to tell these three different stories of like how these
Mhm.
experiences affect these three different college students. I think he is more invested in Malik because I think he even said that Malik felt more like him than
Yes.
any of them, and I don't really know how he was able to write Remy as well as he did. He possibly could have known someone like him, or whatever the case may have been. I think he had a little harder time with Kristen
And that
of
would
the
make
three.
sense as a man, I would
Yeah,
imagine. He's the
yeah,
solo writing credit on this movie. So yeah, I would commend him for going down that route and like exposing and delivering that type of real life college female issue like in this
yeah,
movie. Easier said than done to write that into your movie, to direct it, and for it to be like a major plot point of an already ambitious movie, like thematically. So like good for him. And I agree though, it is definitely the of the main characters, she gets shortchanged the most.
yeah.
I don't feel like there was a really it, I guess it felt kind of glossed over, which is a pretty significant event that happens to this character,
Yeah, I
and
was going
I
to
don't
ask
think
you
it
how
got
you
its due
felt about
time.
that. I was going to ask you how you felt about that because, like, for 30 years spoiler, guys. Yeah, the setup with her makes sense because she is. They do present her as being very young and naive. She meets these two other girls that feel like they could be good friends of hers,
Mm.
but we quickly learn that they're kind of vapid and don't really care. Like when she dyes her hair a different color, they are calling her like a tramp or something behind her back, and then when
Yeah,
she gets to the table, they're like, "Oh my god!" Like basically, you look so
yeah,
good. Um, she goes to a party and she gets drunk, and then a guy named Billy walks her home, and he uh, he ends up like forcing himself on her, and it's a big event. And like I remember watching it uh the first time, and even watching for this, I was like, am I supposed to like watch this event happening to her as something that affects just her, or is this a snowball effect that sets off other things in the movie, right? Because
mm.
what does happen to her, it does get the black guys involved because he calls her dorm room, and Regina King picks up, and he tries to get Kristy Swanson's character on the phone, and
Right.
ends up calling her a black bitch to Regina King, like whatever,
Oh
and
boy.
it gets those characters there, and it creates more of this kind of feud between like this kind of white frat and the black students on campus. And I was like, all right,
Right.
is that the point of this, or is the point supposed to be how this changes her? And I don't think they did enough to really display how it really changed her.
I
I mean,
agree. I
I mean, I
agree
got I got the
wholeheartedly.
gist of it, like of what it was doing to her, and I think that's why it was confusing for her with knowing Jennifer Connelly's character, and then suddenly really meeting Wayne, who's like Omar Epps' character's roommate. A lot of stuff happens with her fast, and it's also done very quickly, and then kind of pushed aside.
Yes,
And of the three main people, and I still don't know what really the point of if it was supposed to be a snowball effect to like, all right, this event's going to show these tensions between all these students, or is it just going to be how this affects her? And I probably did better with the former more than the latter, I
yeah.
guess.
I
Um,
I completely think that like maybe that plot line is not as strong because John Singleton isn't approaching it from that perspective of a woman as a victim of sexual assault. Like obviously
right,
he's not going to be able to like not to say that no other man couldn't accurately showcase it, but I think that is why that plot line suffers, is just because he is a man and a young one at that, and like doesn't adequately tackle it. I think he does his best, but
Yeah.
what I thought ultimately my takeaway from that scene that you described of like Ice Cube and the guys showing up to the frat is like they're going there. Any justice delivered to Billy in that scene is as a result of him calling Regina
I'm
King's
glad. I'm glad you
character a
said that.
black
Yeah.
bitch, and nothing at all
Yeah.
about what happens to. Actually, I feel bad. I forget her character's name. I'm mixing it up.
Kristen.
Kristen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no mention of that. She gets no retribution. Billy doesn't suffer any consequences for that interaction. It's all because of what happens to Regina King, which I think it does a good job of setting up the tension between the black and the white groups, but
Yeah.
not for the right reason, I guess I would say.
Yeah, and I think that if that would have been handled better in the writing, because I love that you pointed that out, because when I was watching it, I was like, I think it's interesting that they have no. I'm not gonna say they don't care, but like
Right.
this is
Maybe
they're
they don't
there.
know. It doesn't do a good job of showing why they're, you know what I mean?
They're there for their friend though, this girl that they
Yes.
know,
Right.
and I think what if it was handled better in the writing, it could have maybe showcased like we kind of defend our own, and that's like the priority.
Yes.
And like I think that's what that was trying to say. It
Yeah,
did
yeah,
come
yeah.
off really like a little wrong, because
I guess,
it
yeah.
seemed like Regina King's character did care about what was going on with her, because when she
Right.
walks in the room, she's like,
It was
"What's wrong?" She's
conflicting.
asking her, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then she was doing the right thing by like being on the phone with him and being like, she's not here. She doesn't. Even if she was here, she doesn't want to talk to you.
Right.
And even though it's kind of cheesy, I did love the cut or like the music cue that they used when he called her that, and then her face, like the kind of like stinger, like that.
I don't know
Like,
if you
I don't know,
did.
you
Yeah.
did basically, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Actually,
And she was like,
maybe
no,
that is the point. Maybe that is like the outcome of the scene, because I'm looking at it as like the whole scene is set up to think that like they're going over there to whoop Billy's ass as like payback for Kristen, but that's not, it doesn't end up really being what actually happens in the actual outcome. So maybe that is the outcome of the scene, is to show that they more take care of their own rather than they're going to
right,
stand up for this white girl who they really don't know and don't care about. And maybe
yeah,
Regina King's expectations would be like that they were going to like stand up for her friend, and that's just not how it unfolds. So maybe it's not as messy of a scene. That's just kind of, I did think it was, the intention was jumbled up, and I guess it didn't
yeah.
relate to
I
what
think
I
it's a good
expected.
example of like a scene that kind of like goes by that whole thing we were saying, that it just does too much at once. Like
There you go.
that scene says a lot, and I think it says, I think that's at one point where I think one of the frat guys says like these gang members are like trying to like
Yeah.
start something, and then I think it's Busta Rhymes like, we ain't gang members, like we go to this school too. Like I think there's like a whole lot there. I think that's sort of like, hey, like you're treating us like we're thugs, and like we also
Right.
are students at this on this campus too. And I think that scene was supposed to say a lot, and I think it's just like an example of like trying to do too much at the same time, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that go on. But I do feel bad for her character the most, because we're kind of like introduced a little bit to her almost first. Like there's a lot where we were with her a lot, at least initially in the beginning, and then she really, I don't want to say she disappears, but like she becomes almost like a supporting character once a bigger part of the plot line
Pretty
kicks
much.
in.
Yeah.
Like, she's not really involved in the stuff with like Remy or Malik, and I guess she wouldn't be. And I guess that's another example of like sometimes those paths don't really cross, I guess. Um,
Right.
but I guess like what would be the point of having like these kind of three main characters if like all three weren't kind of like interlinked a little bit more?
Right.
And and it's not a fault of Kristy Swanson. I think she does a pretty good job with what she's given. Uh, and she does the best that she can. I just think the part is just underwritten, and her motivations. I mean, I'm guessing her motivations for being interested in Jennifer Connelly's character is not so much that she likes women, but more like she feels threatened by her experience with the guy who raped her or tried to rape her,
Right.
and then enter the guy Wayne who's like nice to her, and then Wayne actually plays a good kind of beacon for like her character, being like, don't be afraid of me, because I'm not gonna hurt you. And then also for Malik, who he's like, he's not like these are like not like Remy, basically. He's like, I'm not a white
Right.
supremacist, like don't treat me like that. And that's how he ends up treating him. because he's like, not any fault of his own. He's just like, I just feel comfortable being around my own kind of thing.
Totally.
But
which natural sort of response, I think, for those characters to have, given what they went through. And I think it did do a good job of showing how like other people kind of get associated with their race and the other types of people and kind of caught in the crossfire, so to speak. So I thought that theme like throughout was done pretty well.
Yeah. Oh, but did you want to bring something up?
I wanted to. I can put a pin in that though. I can hold on to that thought if you were going to say something else.
No. Yeah, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Just wanted to mention Laurence Fishburne's character and your take on him. One thing that I thought was interesting is that he seems to be the only character in the movie that treats everyone individually and doesn't associate people with their respective
race.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
He expects everyone to do their best as an individual, treats everybody individually, like shuts down Malik when he tries to use like the black card to
raise card. Yeah,
exactly. Which I thought was interesting, and he was a great. I didn't dig the accent because I know Laurence Fishburne. Like, I know that's
what he sounds like.
Speaks.
Yeah,
I couldn't get it. I found it distracting. Not that it was bad, but it wasn't a character trait, I guess, that I thought was strong for him. But I
didn't really think it was necessary.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, it was interesting choice. I do love what that character represents. So like most good teachers should treat all their students as individuals and not like not cater to the black students, not cater to the white students, not cater to the Asian students. Like, and that's what I think in all of his scenes he's trying to establish when he is trying to educate them. And that's another part that was a little underrated, but like I think for the most part that character does what it needs to do. He's kind of like a bit of a moral compass especially for Malik, more so than anyone. But I do love that he establishes like no one's gonna give you a leg up basically because of like your race, which I think is interesting though, because they do kind of bring up the skinheads bring up the whole thing about affirmative action and all that stuff and how they feel like black people have gotten a leg up because of that over a superior race. So it is interesting to have those different ideologies in it. Again, I think could have been explored a bit more if they were written a little bit more precise, I think. But can see the point that he was trying to make, that this perfectly educated man is telling you that like no, like doesn't matter who you are, like some of these opportunities are not going to just be given to you, and that you have other characters who think that's not the case too, and that would be more like the white supremacist characters, which I think I agree. They feel a little caricature a little bit like.
I would say they all do except for Cole Hauser's character, who I really thought did a great job in this movie. He was unrecognizable as I guess I would call him the main skinhead, Scott. His character, thinking about it like throughout this conversation, I didn't really associate this while watching it, but he's the contrast to Ice Cube's character Fudge, where they're both like the older mentor, older student that's mentoring a freshman who's like kind of lost, I guess, and needs guidance, but like guides them towards different things, obviously. But I thought Cole Hauser was like great. It's weird to like praise his performance because it's so like revolting and like what he represents, but like as an actor did a great job in that role.
And he's kind of scary good, and I think you're right. He's the least of the he feels more real than the others who feel like the others feel like this is what like Hollywood thinks a skinhead
caricatures.
Like.
When you said that's exactly what they felt like.
It's funny because Andrew Baranowski, who played Nako, like the big buff one, he actually played Leatherface in the
Texas Chainsaw Massacre
remake.
I knew I recognized him, not his name, but I went and looked it up too.
The interesting thing with Remy too, because I think you kind of see at the party where all the stuff happens with Billy and Kristen and everything comes to a head, and Billy comes back in the house, and I think Remy says something about like basically getting laid, and Billy just goes off on him, and I think that was to show that like Remy is not fitting in with anyone, even with someone who's his own race at that point. Like someone like Billy should be someone he should get along with, but his approach is all wrong because he doesn't even know how to fit in with anybody. And like he's
so socially awkward.
He didn't fit in with like his black roommates. He doesn't fit in with like the people he met at the party because
Mm.
like it's that whole scene where they offered him like, do you want to play pool? And he's like, oh, I can't. I don't know how to play pool. And there's just like an
Right.
awkward silence, and then they kind of let
Yeah.
him go. And
That
then he
makes
brings up
me,
oh,
yeah,
no, go ahead.
just that makes me feel bad for his character that like before he goes down the rabbit hole that he does, I remember like watching that scene and thinking like there's no attempt to like teach or no offer to
Yeah,
like include him anyway. It's just as simple as like, oh yeah, I don't know how to play, and then that's it. No one really seems to give him a shot. And like
yeah,
it also like I'd say props to the writing for a lot of the scenes with Remy not fitting in. It's like you understand the other people's perspective about why they don't really jump out and like bring him under their
like, be,
fold until the
yeah, right,
skinheads do. Because like
yeah,
you got his roommate is like already like thinks he's weird and doesn't get along with him and isn't gonna like. It's nice enough that he offers him to play, and
yeah,
when he shuts it down, he doesn't take it any further. And then like with the whole scene with Billy, you obviously get why Billy is like upset at the mention of that and like how
yeah,
that
yeah,
conversation erupts. Like that was well written. Like it's not like Billy was just being like a dick to him for the sake of it. It's like he had that experience and was wound up from it, and then someone's like addressing it to him who doesn't really know what just
yeah,
went on behind closed doors. So I think that interaction was very genuine, and of course, it kind of like one of the tipping points for Remy, where like you said, he's not fitting in
yeah.
anywhere in there. And
Yeah, yeah,
that's
it got
yeah,
has no one, and it makes it very easy for him to be
it
persuaded
it was
by,
Remy's character that made me realize the film was going less of a dazed and confused route like I thought it was when it started, and more like an
and
American
dark.
History X.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'd
yeah,
say this movie is a blend of those two.
yeah. That
Yeah.
is interesting. Where you're like, am I watching like a comedy, or like is it going to turn into like
Yeah.
what is this going to be? Yeah, I think by the time like once the skinheads approach Remy, I think that's when it the movie does take a turn. I mean, there's stuff before that, like you can tell there's like racial tension on campus, but
Right.
and it's not played for jokes, but I think it's gonna be serious at that point,
Mhm.
and it's gonna have to like come to a head. I think that I mean, I even though he identifies with Malik more, I think he wrote Remy the best of the
Mm.
three
I agree.
as far as like the evolution of that character. Like you know, you should hate him by by the time he's fully like indoctrinated into that
Right.
culture. But there's still a part of you that feels sorry for him because like if any one of those people early in the movie would have just like put their arm around him for a second, like
Mm.
that wouldn't have happened. Like
Embraced
they're
him.
like, yeah,
I'm glad you brought it up. I was going to ask you like your overall thoughts of Remy, and if you thought like if the skinheads hadn't approached him, do you think he was going leaning towards that path, or do you think he was indoctrinated, like you say? Is that where you lean?
yeah, I think he was indoctrinated. I
Yeah.
think his kind of resistance was pretty low, and like anyone could have. I mean, he's kind of like hostile to the guy when he first meets him too. Like
Right.
he thinks he's coming onto him, and he's like, you know, and he has to like calm him down basically. And I think what that scene shows, it shows well. And I actually think it's a really random shot, but the shot of like having Cole Hauser's like kind of shadow in front of the American flag as he was talking to him was like
Right.
such a striking looking shot. Just
Hmm.
just because of what that represents. I think that I don't think he would have. I think it was just he had no one else, and this person like
Hmm.
this person basically how he introduced himself is basically all Remy wanted was just like someone to hang out with. Like he
Right.
presents it as like he doesn't come out and say like this is who we are. It's just like, hey, do you just want to come and have a beer with me and my friends?
Right.
And that's how easy it was to get him into it.
Yeah.
So I think that how I think leading with like clearly, I think people in that position know when someone's vulnerable and they need something and they need some kind of guidance, and that you can
Hmm.
mold them in a certain direction
It's
that you'll do
it's
that.
predatory,
Yeah, it's
right?
very
Which
predatory.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um, I'm glad you mentioned the American flag because that's something that I really noticed in this movie is that it's bookended. Like the opening and closing shots are of the American
yeah,
flag, which to me signifies that John Singleton really thinks that these are problems that are ingrained throughout American society, and like he uses campus lifestyle as a microcosm for the nation, which university is very much, I would say, a
Right.
representation of, you've got many people from all the demographics in one small area, which represents mostly, not everybody, but a country. And like even the university I went to, that was instilled in us there, is that society is represented in schools, high schools,
Right.
universities. And so I think that it was a much more palatable setting to share what he thinks about American society in the backdrop of the university. And he made that very clear by opening and closing the movie with
Right.
shots of the American
And
flags.
it didn't say, and there's so many shots. Yeah, and there's so many
Okay,
shots of
yeah.
it just like randomly, like, you know, in the background, or and you know, and like, and I think in lesser hands I would have been like, oh, this is very like on the nose, but like it was a good representation of like, and you're right, that's what a lot of people tell you what university life should be like. It's like, it is a representation of like most of this kind of melting pot American society. That's why, you know, when you are kind of sent out there when you're like, you know, young, and you know, for most people it's their first time away from, you know, what they're familiar with, their parents, like they're on their own, and in this kind of place with like so many people they don't know. But it is like a representation of what America should be, or like what they believe it should be. And I think what essentially, like through a fictional school that they presented in this, that it's clear that John Singleton thought that concept was like a little broken, and like it's not and you can't necessarily just throw people into that and hope for the best. Like people still need to be taught, and I think that's what that is running theme throughout the movie, is that there's always more to kind of learn, and like there's never like too much knowledge to gain. And I think that's what he was trying to like really say, is there's like the idea of what college life should be like, and then here is what it could be realistically for a lot of people when they don't know anyone, when they, you know, I didn't know, I was what, 11 when this movie came out, so I don't really know what the experience was like as far as being in a school at that age, where there's white students, there's black students, like it's like a melting pot of people. I do know as I got older that was still a discussion though. You know, it was still, you know, people make fun of that scene in like high school movies where they say, you know, you got your black kid, and they actually do it in this movie.
They do
where they actually
Ice Cube does it.
And that, but that was kind of true with certain friends I had. I know I went to a predominantly white high school, but you know, it was very much sectioned off for some students, where this is where the Mexicans hang out, this is where these people hang out. And then if you chose not to like, well, I'm not gonna like go by that and just hang out with who I want to hang out with. At my school, that was an easy thing to do, like high school, and I went to film school, so it was like a little different than this. But I was like that for a lot of my friends, where it was very much a segregated, even though it was a, you know, quote unquote diverse environment at their schools. A lot of them were separated because they just felt more comfortable being around their own kind, and I don't know if that was a bigger problem in 95 compared to like today. It feels like, I mean, I think there's a moment in the movie where they talk about like, would you stand like for the Pledge of Allegiance and stuff like that. And you know, that's something that we dealt with, like, you know, with the whole Colin Kaepernick thing, and like the, you know,
I'm glad you brought that up too, because I didn't get the significance of that question. And it's Ice Cube has asked me it to Omar Epps' character, and he specifically mentions in this hypothetical scenario, he says, if the stadium was full of white people and looking at you during the national anthem, what would you do? And he goes, I would probably stand. I kind of just didn't get the context maybe to that.
So I
think
because like the whole thing with like Colin Kaepernick, like football player, like taking a knee during all that,
I remember all that stuff. Yeah.
And then feeling like, you know, I'm supposed to be, you know, standing up for this like pledge, you know, for this like national anthem that's supposed to represent all of us. And I feel like as I'm not being represented, so therefore I'm not gonna support that notion. I think what he's trying to say is, if you're in a room full of white people and they're all standing there staring at you, expecting you to stand for it and, you know, salute for it, and you feel like you aren't represented by this country, you feel like that you're not, you know, you feel like you're less than. Like, would you still do it just to placate them, or would you not do it to kind of feel good about yourself because of why these are the reasons why you're choosing not to?
Right.
And I think that's what he was trying to say there. Like, because if you're a room full of white people, are you just gonna play the game and do it because they expect you to do it? Or are you gonna like stand by your beliefs and not like, I don't
Right.
feel connected to this, so therefore I'm not. And I thought that was interesting that was a conversation being had. Well, at least in that movie in 1995, and
Definitely, yeah. Because I related it to the Colin Kaepernick stuff, and I just didn't realize that analogy or like that whole concept of standing or not standing had come from before that, just as my own ignorance. So I thought that was interesting. I wanted that to come up in the conversation. But that is such a great scene of Ice Cube's character like prompting uh Malik to like think for himself and like
right,
realize why he says and does these things, compared to like Cole Hauser influencing Remy and sort of like not guiding him, but not allowing him to think for himself and indoctrinating him. I think that's such a great contrast between those two characters and what they do with their respective proteges, I guess you could call them.
right. And I think it's interesting too because like the Remy and Malik character are so juxtaposed to each other. They're both
Right.
angry for their
Yes.
own reasons,
Yep.
but then you have like you said, different mentors who are either trying to guide that anger in a more positive direction, and then another one who's trying to like poke the bear and like
Right.
use it for a more violent resolution. And I think it's interesting because like again, two characters that if they would have given each other like a moment, they probably would have gotten along because
Totally.
they are both in kind of similar boats, like maybe not
Right.
maybe one's more confident than the other, but they're still going through the like navigating through the same kind of playing field, just different scenarios. And I do think it's interesting that their characters are the ones that come to a head though, because they're very much alike in a lot of ways.
Yeah, but
And
molded differently, right?
molded differently. Yeah, I will say though, Michael Rapaport, I only know mostly for doing comedies. No, lately he's more of a comedian. I've
Right.
actually never really seen him do. I mean, other than this, do like a lot of dramatic stuff that I can remember. But he is very good here. I mean,
He is.
I want to say he's the best actor in the movie. I mean, Omar Epps does a really good job too. But uh, just in terms of like the development of that character and how he starts and where he ends up, and also him, like I said earlier, you sympathize with him despite the fact that he does some pretty fucked up,
Right.
stuff. I mean, it's the moment, like, and it's just a series of scenes, which I think which are so strong. But I forgot that they come like kind of back to back to back. It's after he's like shaved his head, he's full on skinhead now, and he's you know almost fully indoctrinated with them. And I think he walks by Malik's character and says something about him wearing the Black Panther shirt, and then he says something about it being reverse racism, and then he says like 1995 coon, and coon is a really derogatory term for
I was like, whoa.
So it's that moment, and then like Tyra Banks, who it's weird to not mention her. This is like her first movie. She was like a huge model.
I didn't know her. I recognized her name, but didn't know why. And I did not realize she was a supermodel. I think she was actually dating John.
Which is probably the main reason she's in the my
yeah. Well, she does a great job for a non-actress.
She holds her own. Like there's some stuff at the end I think she does really well, sells really well. And
I did think her dramatic why was very, very Hollywood. I kind of cracked up.
Dude, I have a feeling when I'm watching certain movies and I think of moments, I'm like, oh, he's not gonna like that. He's gonna be like, oh, that's so cheesy.
Yeah. It felt like very John Singleton though. He loves his like moments of drama.
Yeah. So it's that scene, and then Malik goes to the room to confront him, and basically like implies that he's kind of like a bitch and he's not gonna do anything, and like he's scared, and then Remy like completely trashes the room, and then his roommate comes, and then it turns into a whole big scene. I forgot that those scenes were just back to back to back.
Yeah.
And then like the stuff that I don't know. I mean, I know kind of what it is like, for at least based on hearing what other people have said about white actors that have to say some of that stuff in movies like this. I know Leonardo DiCaprio did not like doing it when he did Django Unchained, and like Samuel L. Jackson was basically like, just say it, motherfucker. Like kind of like just like it's a movie.
Another Tuesday.
That's another
that
Tuesday.
Line that he said, yeah.
and it had to be. And like I'm looking like again, like we were talking about it with Baby Girl in a much different way, but like how to like kind of shut that off as actors, like as a black actor for Omar Epps, as a white actor for Michael
Oh,
Rapaport, who probably doesn't even want to say shit like that to another black person.
you got
And
to go to a place inside you that
yeah,
is hard to access, I would imagine.
and it's crazy though, and it's a testament to Michael Rapaport's performance though, is he's saying all this awful stuff to him, but the way he's saying it, you almost you can tell that it's just like a boy just trying to feel like he's tough. Like, because he keeps calling him those names, but he keeps going like,
Right.
"I'm the man. I'm better than you." Like, it's almost like he's hyping himself up to
It
believe
sounds
it.
very rehearsed, right? And not
Yeah,
in a way that it was delivered badly, but like you said,
yeah,
he's more like trying to convince himself that he is this person, and it doesn't come across authentically. Like he's a guy that this is what he thinks he has to do to fit in with this new group. It doesn't seem like
yeah,
it's representative of his actual beliefs.
yeah. And what I do love about that scene though is he has the gun on him and the roommate. I love that they have the roommate scared for his life, like on the floor, like he has a gun,
Yep,
and Malik doesn't flinch
that's
at all to it.
budge.
like
Yeah,
like
it was
he's
great.
so angry, and I love that they wait until Remy leaves the room for Malik to kind of have a moment where you can just tell all his anger just like comes out of him, and then he just starts running after him, and then of course like
Right.
the security stop him,
Oh god, that was tough.
and
When they
that's
start
a
beating
rough.
him up. Oh,
Yeah, and there's like two moments of that. I mean, there's a moment like later in the movie where all this stuff happens with the shooting,
yeah,
and where you know I mean, it's hard to watch when you're, and and even the roommate, like, is like, no, that's not him. That's not the guy who had the gun. But that's a normal thing
mm,
for so many black people who, the assumption is like they're the
right.
ones that did something wrong, which is why I get there is that all that hostility, which is why I think maybe some of them don't always comply when they need to. Don't agree with that at all either. But like, I thought the movie did a good job of like, well, this is why. Like, this is the assumptions are
I
being made
agree.
about what they're doing in their character, and like
Yeah,
that's why they're so angry. Um, but yeah, I thought those three things were so strong together because it really is like a progressive like evolution of like each of those characters getting so angry and getting to a point where there's a point of no return after that,
hmm,
especially once Fudge sees the one skinhead walking the stairs and they all go fight them.
yeah,
Um, I could have done without all the slow mo parts of that fight. Um,
yeah. Me
wish it was
too.
just wish it was just more of a basic brawl, but I guess it was just to add dramatic effect to all of that. But I did like that they use those scenes to kind of show like there is a really bad escalation of things to come,
Mm,
basically.
true that. Yeah, that felt like a tipping point, like for the skinheads. Like they once they kind of got beaten, they thought, okay, like how do we one up this? And then how all that devolved was really well done. What I found the most unbelievable is how that big skinhead just got made a fool of so easily. Like, that guy would have
Yeah, I got like
smashed
whooped.
skulls. Yeah, no, that
They threw
guy
him into like the soda machine and like really like wrecked him.
Mako was his name. Yeah, yeah, that
Yeah,
guy. I
like
think
yeah.
that guy would have been able to handle himself a lot better. Um,
Um,
yeah.
did, were you? I mean, were you expecting it to go to its climax? I mean, like,
No,
uh,
not at all.
well, it's interesting because I'm trying to think about it. Like, there there have been like school shootings, like reported school shootings in real life, but like there wasn't like the real big one was Columbine, and that was like a few years after this, and I was in high school and all that. And I'm trying to think at like at the time, it had to be a big deal that he depicted like a shooting like that on a
Yeah, I didn't think about
college
that.
college campus,
Yeah.
and I was trying to look up like if there have been any big ones like that, and like I couldn't find like any like I hate to say mainstream ones, but like more that were in the media compared to like before Columbine,
Right.
and like with this coming out in '95, and I thought like no, this had to be like a really strong like image, like sequence of scenes at the time when it came out, like
Hmm.
and a really bold thing to do. I don't think you can really do it now. I think it'd be really kind of. I think there are people would be more sensitive to depicting that in a movie now, or I think it'd be a little harder to get away with. But
Definitely.
what did you think of it getting to that point?
Mm. So yeah, I didn't think that that was in the movie's DNA like when I started because again, it's weird to go back and think, like, when you don't know where he's going at
Or where
all.
it's going. Yeah.
I didn't even know that it was going to be like IMDb classifies it as a crime drama
Drama.
thriller.
Yeah.
Drama for sure.
Sure. Yeah.
But again, like I said, like it had the DNA of like a hangout movie of like a good. I was pretty on board early on that it was going to be a depiction of like just various social tensions amongst different groups, races, genders, and all that stuff, and like on campus. And I thought that was really as deep as the movie was going to go.
Right.
I think it did a good job, like while I'm watching it, getting there, like especially with like where Remy's character goes and the shooting and whatnot. But no, I didn't really see that
And
coming until
they have Kristen organizing this like event for like unity and peace amongst the
yeah.
students. And like,
I'm like, oh, what a
of
perfect
course it's gonna
storm.
happen on this day. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, no, before this, I never thought it was going to be a movie that ends up essentially being about like a school shooting and this like tensions boiling over into this huge event. But no, I think it was did a good job getting there like in a believable way. And I got to say, like one of the most poignant moments of the film for me was when Remy is cornered by the security
Yeah.
guards and is sort of like given up and asks the main one that's like communicating with him to stop lying about it's all going to be okay. And when he says that line, it goes, it hurts.
It hurts.
Oh
Yeah.
man, that was a gut punch
That
because
kind
you
of hit me.
feel
Yeah.
so much for that character and like he's doing despicable things, but I think John Singleton did a great job of showing us like the effort that Remy's character put in to try to be accepted, to be an outsider trying to fit in the completely new landscape,
Yeah.
and it just not working. And then the only people that seem to give him the time of day are these despicable,
Hateful.
gross,
Yeah.
hateful people. And you just didn't. It was tough to see that be the outcome for that character. So when he says that, and like only he really kind of knows what he means by that. The other, like the officers pointing the guns at him, obviously
Yeah.
don't relate to what he's saying. But as the audience member who's seen all that and everything that he's experienced, it was hard not to sympathize for him in that moment.
Dude, there's so many convicting moments in that scene because, like, of course, like, yeah, we should point out that, and I guess the only real reason for Tyra Banks' character to be there is because like, we need someone to die in that
An
moment. That would
emotional
be
anchor, yeah.
that would be a big deal for Malik. And I guess they're given enough scenes where it's like, okay, they have decent enough chemistry. They're not. She doesn't have like a huge part, but like it's enough, I guess, that if she is to die, that you would care that at least more so for him. And they really do lay it on thick. You're right. They throw in the why. They have her cough up like copious amounts of blood and like
Yeah, it was really thick blood on
thick,
the side of her face. Yeah,
yeah, and
very
it's all
Hollywood. It reminded me of Tropic Thunder a little bit.
and it's all like I do love how they display how he's in shock because he tunes everything out and he can
That was
barely
really
hear
well done.
he can really hear barely hear like Laurence Fishburne's character who's trying to help him, and so that's primarily why she's there. And I don't mind that. I mean, I guess it does. You need someone. I think they originally wrote it where it was going to be Malik that got shot, and he was like, well, that wouldn't really work for the story because won't be the point. Like who would be there to really mourn him? And I think the other characters weren't enough to Fudge and all them would be enough to mourn Malik getting killed that way. I guess it could, but it wouldn't be as poignant as taking away someone that he was starting to care about. And he's finds Remy, he's attacking him, and of course the security guards are beating him and then like they're like basically letting Remy get away, and they're so sensitive to Remy, even though it's fairly obvious that like this guy clearly did something. I know like they caught Malik on top of him and he's choking him, but like clearly something's wrong with this guy too. And how they're so like with like kind of kick gloves trying to like calm him down. So there's those emotions in that scene that like that feel kind of like uncomfortable to watch. But then also I'm also feeling sorry for Remy in that moment too, because I like you said, the it hurts line got me. I kind of forgot that you said it. And I also was wondering, I still don't know when he says I'm sorry, I can't tell if he's saying it to them or if he's addressing that to Malik. Or if he's just like I'm like at that point, if he's just like I'm just sorry that it got here. If he's telling them or if he's like really saying it to Malik, at that
Right.
point. And I think it can go either way, where he kind of is like, this is, I hit a wall here and I don't know how I got here.
Right.
And I think also it's it hurts line, and when he says like, oh, I just wanted to be an engineer, like all the things that he wanted to do.
Right. He didn't
You know,
ask for any of this stuff to
I
happen.
think, yeah, I think so many things are like within that few lines of dialogue, kind of like what you want from your life when you go off to college, and you're just like, this is all I want to do, this is all I want to be, and like how that was kind of destroyed for him
Mm,
because of a series of bad decisions. And I think it kind of teaches us a bit to like kind of, you can't be friends with everyone, but maybe just pay
mm,
attention to people a bit more when they're like trying to make an effort to uh fit in. And because it's harder for some people than it is for others, I guess. And I think they
mhm.
did a good job with that character though, of like showing his kind of like naivete a bit, and like how like shy he was, and how he didn't really have a place in the world at all, even though he talked about his father being like a survivalist and all this other thing. I feel like he had all these like things within his life where he was bound to go like some way, and it was just a matter of like who was gonna like
He was just waiting to
pull
get
that.
pulled in a direction, right?
Yeah. um but yeah, I know like some critics think the ending is like too on like what's the kind of lesson, it kind of. And also at that time, like, he had been known for doing movies that like at the end they kind of divulge into violence. There's like, it happens in Boys in
Yep.
the Hood. There's a moment in Poetic Justice where that's similar. And then
Okay.
there's a moment, of course, with this, it ends in
Yes.
like a barrage of violence. And they were just like, what is the message there? Like, I think they were trying to maybe overstating or overthinking what the message was. I
Hmm.
kind of just think like that what that ending does, even though it felt very like Hollywood to kind of end it in a potential like mass shooting. I think it just kind of shows like what happens when this escalation is kind of, it goes unchecked and you don't do anything to stop it. Like it eventually will boil over into something
Hmm.
that's extremely violent and completely irreversible. And I think that is what that climax is supposed to do. It might be like a little too on the nose, but I think that's what that it's supposed to convey. It's like if you don't like try to put a buttons on these things, that you know something will explode
Hmm.
eventually. And I think that's what that says.
You beat me sort of like to the setup of this question, like by describing the end of his first three movies, and I'm glad you did it because you do it a better way than I would have. But what I wanted to ask is like considering how what all these movies culminate into and it being violence, whether it's like between races or like within one race, as in Boys in the Hood. And don't, I've not seen Poetic Justice, so I have no idea the context there. But ultimately, I'm curious, like having seen all these John Singleton movies, like would you say that is he a pessimistic director in how he regards humans and society, like in America, or do you think that there's more optimism beneath the surface of these
Well,
movies, or what's your
I think
interpretation?
he I think he still offers some optimism, right? Because even at the end of the Boys in the Hood, uh, of course, you learn that Doughboy ends up dying too by the end of that, just through like
Hmm.
the title card or whatever. But
Right.
there's still kind of hope for Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character at the end of that.
Hmm.
So there's your optimism, I guess, there. Even though someone like Ricky, who didn't do anything wrong and pretty much got a right to USC, and he was going to go places.
Right.
Um, and you know, even though I think it was important in that movie to show this is what that violence can do. It can take away someone really good as well, and doesn't just take away someone who's bad. And I think also having Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character in that movie attempt to go with them at first for retribution, and he decides not to, because like
Hmm.
at first his dad's like, no, you can't go. What are you doing? You can't go, and he decides to leave, and he realizes on the way there that he can't do it, and tells him to like turn around and drop him off. I think the optimism there is that there is still an out for someone in that position. And 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 Poetic
Hmm.
Justice, there's optimism with the main character kind of finding her way by the end too. And then with this, I thought at the end, having Kristen and Malik, even though she doesn't really do a lot by that point, I
Yep.
thought it was really good. It was an evolution of his character, because you had that one conversation you had with Wayne where Wayne's trying to talk to him like, hey, I'm not like that. I'm your friend. I thought we were friends. And he basically cuts him down like, you're cool, but like, I'd rather be on my own. When she is saying like, I organized this thing, I feel like it's my fault. And he has a moment where he pauses and looks at her. He could have said the same thing to her. And he, instead of doing that, he kind of gives her like, because it's not, he gives her kind of words of encouragement rather than being dismissive. So like those two characters still, something is learned by the end of it. And I think that is where the optimism is. It's just like, even though in all this like carnage, there is still kind of hope and all that. I do love that they had like one, I think, minuscule interaction earlier in the movie, and she referenced
in the
like,
elevator.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, oh, is it crazy that we never really talked to each other? And he kind of like, yeah, it is. And I love that moment though, because it's again another moment where he could have been like, he could have addressed that, how they initially met, and he didn't. I think at that point, all these bad things had happened, and what would be the point of him kind of living in anger? I think, so even though I think John Singleton's movie is a shoot kind of they verge this kind of like sequence of violence, I don't think he ends them on that note though. That he ends them on a note where there is like optimism at the end of it. I think he ends a lot of them that way because that's also what he knows too. I mean, like that he's seen that, he's experienced it. He's, there are people that have been extras in some of his movies who are actual gang members who, died in real life.
Shit.
Like there's a guy in it, the guy that opens the door when Tyra Banks comes to the apartment that they're in, and he's like, "Oh, you have any homies with you, or you have any sisters?" That guy was an actual gang member. He died like shortly after filming this movie. He got shot, and because he was an actual like real life gang member. He's in Boys in the Hood briefly too. Like, so he knew a lot of these people, like knew a lot of these experiences. So I think that's why his movies had this kind of like element of violence to it. And it's interesting that they thought that worked in Boys in the Hood, but thought it felt that it was laying it on too thick in his next couple of movies though. But I don't really know why critics were so harsh on him with his next two efforts.
Maybe, I'm not sure why either. I don't really have an explanation, and I'm so fresh off the watch, I haven't even really had the chance.
But maybe because it's like maybe because Boys in the Hood was such a good, I mean, a kind of a game changer of a movie, and you hadn't seen anything like that before. And I do think like John Singleton was pretty young when he passed away, and
I was going to ask you that he was 51. Do you know?
Yeah, he had a stroke. He had a stroke, and
man.
Way so like young. Way too young. And I like I said, there are people that appreciate stuff beyond Boys in the Hood now, like Poetic Justice, this movie, Baby Boy's another one. But his career after he started making those movies, and he got into more mainstream stuff like Too Fast, Too Furious, and he directed the Shaft remake. He did Four Brothers. I always used to feel that his choices post these movies were so weird.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm trying to figure a bigger way to say it, but like it was
the Four Brothers and the Mark Wahlberg one.
Yeah, with Tyrese.
Oh, I didn't know that was John Singleton. Okay.
So I always thought like, he made so much. I mean, I guess like if you get to a point where you can make a Hollywood movie, a popcorn movie, you're gonna take it. But like, after Baby Boy though, he never really went back and did anything grounded like that anymore.
Maybe because his life at that time was living in Hollywood as a famous director. Yeah. Maybe he ran out of that inspiration. Who knows?
No, it could that could be right. Yeah. I think for a lot of people, he was a director that didn't really always live up to the promise of what he established with Boys in the Hood.
Right.
And we've talked about it before with people like Damien Chazelle or anyone who has like a big hit or like a big movie that's critically acclaimed out the gate, how hard it can be to live up to that. And I'm sure he went through that. I know he was proud of Higher Learning. I mean, the reviews were, I don't think a 46% is that seems pretty harsh on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, I think it's harsh as well.
But some of the people that didn't like it, who's this? It's hard to follow Higher Learning's goals. Unfortunately, writer director John Singleton too often struggles to fit his themes with a consistent, engaging story. one critic said that it's an intriguing look at differences between races and how differences can clash. It's just that he likes to shout at a lot of things, but not really land on all his ideas. I mean, I guess they're saying a lot of stuff that we were saying, that there's a lot going on
But it
in the
seems like they
movie.
just didn't like it as much, maybe, as we
Yeah.
do.
And Roger Ebert he liked it though. He says with a clear eye, he sees with a clear eye and a strong will, and is not persuaded by fashionable ideologies. His movies are thought provoking because he uses familiar kinds of characters and then asks hard questions about them. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, like wrapping up how you felt about it. Do you think that he kind of like his reach kind of there's just too much that he was trying to go for? Like your overall feelings on the movie as a whole, did it feel like, oh, there's just a lot of too much going on here that he really couldn't touch on in a significant way, or do you think he got his point across enough for you?
I think he definitely gets his point across. I think how I would summarize it is maybe thematically he bit off more than he could chew in a way that he
Yeah,
could wrap everybody's story up very nicely while addressing everything that he tries to with the narrative
yeah,
and each character's respective storyline. Mostly, I would say it comes down to like Kristen's storyline that doesn't necessarily get all the attention maybe that it deserves. Maybe like
yeah,
the resolution between like Jennifer Connelly's character, I guess I feel like
yeah. I always
there's
forget
some
she's in
things
this,
there that
dude.
don't fit. I know, yeah. There's just some like that her character, like the side plot there. I feel like maybe you could trim some of that off of this movie. Like it didn't feel like it really felt justified.
Yeah,
What else? Mostly it. I think like ultimately like there's more to like and appreciate here than not. It did feel maybe like it's a step like I definitely this doesn't touch Boys in the Hood for me. That movie is like an
oh yeah,
all-time
yeah,
classic and one of the greats, but this movie is definitely like a strong follow-up and in time it definitely feels like John Singleton has his signature on this movie. I think he like gets across what he's trying to say and like how his view of like American society from like a racial standpoint, mostly a racial standpoint. I think
yeah,
he tries to include some other themes about like women's like rights and how they're treated by their peers in society that just didn't come across as strong. But mostly I
yeah.
think it comes down to like I think like white versus black and like that's
Right.
narrative and like he does a good job I guess telling the story between the characters of Remy and Malik and all the supporting characters and it came across
Yeah.
well but definitely had
Did it
some weak
feel too like?
points
Did it feel too heavy-handed for you, or was it just kind of
in parts. Again, it was one of those movies that
you know?
was and like I'm struggling to think of like perfect examples. I think there was some interesting editing cuts. There was a lot of great conversations that like just had a quick cut flash to like maybe
Yeah,
a
yeah,
whole other day
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah. I saw that
So
too.
there was like some great lines, some great conversations throughout, and then there would be some like weaker ones. Like it wasn't like all the way one or another, like many movies. It had its moments of shine. A lot of them with character of Fudge. I thought when he was like imposing some wisdom on the league, and then again
Yeah,
with Laurence Fishburne's Professor Phipps, like a lot of their
yep,
interactions, like with Malik or with each other, like were really great. And then some
yeah,
of the other stuff came across heavy-handed. I'd say a lot of the stuff with Kristen and even Malik, I guess, had some heavy-handed moments too, but
so
not enough that it like made me think that way entirely about the movie.
yeah,
But I had a healthy dose of both. But yeah,
yeah.
ultimately, as a rewatch, like, did you change your mind much about how you saw it the first time? And are those problems persistent still, or not so
Yeah,
much?
yeah, a lot of them did, but I think I viewed it a little bit differently because like in the moment I was like watching by myself, like the stuff that wasn't working. You know, I don't think you can fault a filmmaker for like having ambition, and you can tell that he wanted to tell
True.
like a bigger story than he had told before, and kind of tell a story. I mean, yeah, yeah, I think that's why some people think he wrote white characters like as a quote unquote evil because he didn't know how to write them. But I don't really agree with that. I think like that could be true, like of course the skinheads and stuff like that. But I think
Hmm.
he did. I think Remy is actually really well written,
I
and
agree.
I love I like the intentions of the character of Wayne, who was like the roommate that Malik had.
Yeah.
He just didn't have a lot to do, so like there wasn't really and that could be a fault of like the writing. Maybe he didn't know how to really write them well. And the same thing with Kristen. Like he's not a white girl, so it might be hard for him to write
Yeah.
a girl who that goes through the things that she went through. So I still thought that he tried to do way too much in a single movie, but some of the moments are so strong that I think that overall, I think it's a good movie that I think people should definitely check out, and more importantly, just because I think it's still very topical today. There's so much in it, even though it came out in '95, that still resonates in a big way that I think even a newer generation can watch it and be like, oh, this feels relevant still.
Right.
So that's why I actually liked it a bit more than I had in the past. I still had the same issues with it, but was moved by scenes more than I had been, when I watched it like 15 years ago. So
Right.
still think it holds up. I did want to ask you before we did the scores. I know we talk a lot about like when there are movies that like, came out before you were born or like when you were just born that feel like a product of their time. When you're watching this, or you're like, oh, this feels very like 1995 or were you able to kind of take the time out of it a little bit?
No, surprisingly not. I didn't feel like I mean it has the DNA of a 90s movie for sure, but it definitely, like you said it already, it definitely feels topical still today.
Yeah.
Of course, like any movie from its time, like outfit wise, I think maybe or definitely musically, like on the music choices of this movie, do you feel like the
Yeah,
90s
there was a lot of Rage Against the Machine,
soundtrack
and
is what
there
I'm
was
trying to
like
say. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
There a lot
definitely.
of Rage Against the Machine. There's
Yeah.
definitely some Ice Cube in there, and because he's always been playing
Yeah,
a song
exactly.
for the movies in. And I
The
thought,
outro has
and then
song
also the
lyrics.
girls like because I remember the '90s and like the girls like the style for like Kristen and
Yeah.
especially
Oh
all
man.
that I think they even have Eve's Plum play at the end who was a '90s band. They play at the like kind of like Unity Fest
Okay,
that they're
that
at.
Peace Fest
Like
thing. Yeah,
that
yeah.
Peace Fest, they look very much a product of the night.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, and Wayne especially looks like a product of the '90s. The kind of like long hair and like
Yep.
yeah. So yeah, looks wise and music wise, yeah. But I still think the story you're able to kind of forget that you're watching a movie that came out in
Definitely.
1995.
I think this
So
movie
I think that,
works for any decade that you watch it in. So that's
and
how I felt. But
I do think it was interesting though. A little fun fact that he wanted Leonardo DiCaprio to play Remy,
mhm.
and was close to getting him, but he was doing The Quick and the Dead, and he couldn't do it. And I could totally. I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio would have killed that part. I don't know if he would have
Totally.
shaved
Yeah.
his head. I'm trying to imagine him shaving his head down that low. But yeah, I think he would have been exceptionally good in that role. I mean, at that time, a lot of even though Poetic Justice didn't hit as hard as Boys in the Hood, I think a lot of young people at that time really wanted to work with John Singleton. So
Mm.
like, I think it would have been a really cool thing to kind of have him in it. But Michael Rapaport does a really good job,
Yes, it
and
does.
it's probably his one signature role. So, and Tupac Shakur was supposed to play Malik, but then he ended up in
Yeah.
Up.
Yeah, I saw that. I read that. That's pretty neat.
And Dustin Hoffman was supposed to be the Laurence Fishburne's character, but he wanted the story to be more
Wow.
about Malik and the teacher, and he's like, no, that's not the movie I'm making. So he
Okay.
dropped out. Yeah, so there are a lot of little things like that, but yeah, I don't think it's a bright spot in his filmography.
Yeah, me too. I'd say for sure. Especially like I think like you said, his earlier career showed more promise and was stronger than some of his later works. I haven't seen
Yeah,
anything post Fast and Furious 2, so I'm very out of touch with his filmography. But this was a great watch from a director who's made one of my favorite movies. So it's always good to see
yeah.
something else from him.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what you might think of Poetic Justice. Like, we might have to like deep dive that or do something with it later in the
100%. I'd
year or
be down.
something for sure.
Um,
Yeah. So, what score would you give this bad boy?
I'm giving it like a solid 3 right now, as per like letterbox rating standards. Like that's good for me. Like you said, it had its attractions, things. I think it'd be one of those movies that I might appreciate. I might revisit in 10 years, see how things have changed. Like I think I'll still have the same issues, but they won't necessarily like nothing that they really bothered me. And there was lots to like in this movie, but it was when you're watching something for the first time and you don't have the rose-colored glasses, like some things just stick out a little bit more. But I don't think I'll nearly like care about some of the narrative juggling as much on a rewatch. So yeah, 3 out of 5 for me. To make a long story short, I enjoyed it. Strength in the acting with Michael Rapaport. Really liked Omar Epps, who I don't think I've seen anything by him. He was a really great lead here. Besides his accent, Laurence Fishburne is reliable as always.
It's just such an unnecessary addition. Like he could just
I just wonder if that was him or if that was direction from John Singleton. I can't imagine, but maybe he's like, I want to try this out.
Yeah, it was a little distracting at first.
Yeah, and Cole Hauser too, who I've since seen him on Yellowstone as Rip, and then realizing that he's been around for a lot longer than that role. I love seeing him pop up and stuff. I thought his performance was great. So, that's my thoughts. And how would you rate Fire
So I
being
at first I gave it a 3, and I kept going back and forth like 3, 3.5, 3. I landed on 3.5 at the end.
Right on.
But it's like a very like loose 3.5. But I was thinking 3 when I wrote the review, but then I was like, I pointed out a lot of positives when I wrote it. So I was like,
and I do that sometimes when I start writing and thinking about the movie. Sometimes in my head, my rating changes.
But but honestly, the things I like I said earlier are the things that kind of hold it back. But there's just a lot going on, and like he can't serve every aspect of the story the way that he wants to. And that, I mean, while the intentions are good, like it kind of does shortchange the narrative a little bit, especially with certain characters, especially when you have 3 leads, like especially you present a story that these are our 3 lead characters and then one person kind of disappears or kind of fades in the background. Like that makes it a little harder. But I guess because of how it made me feel by the end of it, I upped it to a 3.5 because I still felt like when it was over, I felt like strong about like the feelings I had about it when it was over. And I mean, a lot of it had to, I mean, like you said, you made the point about the lines that Remy had at the end before he shot himself. Like that I had forgotten I forgot all the lines that he said in that moment. And it really like I felt like I got punched in the gut when he was saying it.
Very emotional.
Each line, I was like, God damn it.
And unexpected, like not a character that you would typically feel sympathy for. But again, I think that comes down a lot to Michael Rapaport's performance and some of the writing there too really help that stick the landing.
So 3.5 for me. So
right on.
All right.
Before I sign us off, I know that you wanted to give some love to, I don't know, this is on behalf of both of us, to you guys listening and those of us that support us online for giving us a lot of recognition on Good Pods. But Gaius, I'll let you take it away on that note.
Yeah, thank you guys for making us number 1 on the film review chart on Good Pods. We've been number 1 before. It's been a little bit. I was going
to ask if it had happened before because I know we've been in the 2 spots.
Well, it's been since you've been on. We've been number 1 before. But I will say the good thing about Good Pods is like we want you to listen to us anywhere you can listen to us. But Good Pods prioritizes independent podcasts, and promoting it and all this stuff is just us. We don't have anyone. Yes, we always talk about playlists, but they edit and do all that stuff for us. Like as far as like pushing the show and marketing it and pushing it out there, that's all us. So it's a very much an independent show, and Good Pods really allows independent shows to get discovered. They do have all the same shows that you would find on like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. All those big shows are there, but all the independent shows are pushed out to the front of their app. So thank you guys for discovering us there. And also like on the film review chart, we haven't dropped below number 5 in like months. So even when we're not number 1, we're still in the top 5 on the film review chart. And then on the film and TV review chart that counts film and TV, we're number 3. And this week on the top 100 overall shows, we were number 32. So I think that's pretty good. And that's any category.
We're in good company over there. Good Pods.
So thank you for listening to us there and anywhere. And I feel like we haven't really done like a ton yet for the new year, like new. We did bring news back, and it seems like you guys like that, so that's good. But there's definitely a lot more that we are going to do as the year kind of progresses. A lot of ideas that we have, little things that we want to change about the show. We even did a little bit with this anniversary episode where we want to add a little bit more context to what we were talking about at the beginning and not just say like, here's a movie we love that came out 20 years ago.
Right.
And that's what we're going to try to do moving forward with the anniversaries, just to make them stand out. And even if it's an anniversary that we watch and it doesn't stand out as much, we still want to give some kind of history and context into like, hey, we loved it 25 years ago, and this time it didn't hit as well. So like, I know this is back to the blockbuster. You want to feel like you are actually at the video store and we're helping you find something that you really want to watch. There's got to be more emphasis in the name. So like we're trying to make a lot of changes in regards to how we discuss the movies. That's a little bit more informative, not boring, but just a little bit more
informative is a great way of putting it. That's right.
Yeah.
And
a little bit more informative than what we normally do. So
Mhm.
Hopefully you hear that with this one, and you'll definitely hear that with our future anniversary episodes as well.
Yes, on that note, we do have February right around the corner. As of recording, it is January the 28th. So this episode should be live just around the end of the month. It might even be February by the time you guys are listening to it. So for those that are listening, may very well have voted. I'm not sure actually of the outcome right now between The Breakfast Club and Shutter Island, but we will be covering one of those episodes during this month, as well as In the Mouth of Madness. And Gaius, what was your pick?
And Scream 3. Scream 3 was kind of a combination of me and Mark, because Mark was like, hey, I would love to be on for Scream 3. And honestly, I feel like we had to do it because we have covered either every Scream release or every Scream anniversary so far since the podcast has been in existence. So I think the only one we haven't covered is Scream 4. I think that one gets an anniversary, I think, next year. I can't remember what year it actually came out.
I think it's 2011.
That's
the number that jumps out to me.
So I mean, you might be right about that.
Yeah.
So right now, Scream 4 will be the only one we haven't really touched on yet. So we, in addition to having Mark on because he's fun during those episodes.
Yes.
It's like Scream is very lucky for us. Honestly, Scream was our very first anniversary episode ever on the show. The first Scream. Wow. And at the time it was our biggest episode. So that's when we were like, oh, we gotta do anniversaries like more often.
It's in the show's DNA for sure.
So it's in the DNA. So like, there were other movies I probably could have picked, but no, it's cool. Scream 3 will be my pick for February. In the Mouth of Madness, also a great pick for you because I haven't watched it in a really long time.
Yeah, I'm really excited to chat both of those. Scream 3 is the Scream I'm the least familiar with. I've seen it twice. I think it's been a long time since I've seen it, so really interested in diving into that one and covering that for February. It's going to be a great month. A lot of horror that we're covering earlier in the year.
I know.
Winter seems to be like a alternative horror time of year for us, especially even just with the releases that have come out with Wolfman and Nosferatu at the end of last year. So, but it's great. I love it.
Yeah.
And I guess it's been a trend for horror movies to be released in the beginning of the year, but I'm all for it.
And they do well. And they do well for us too. So it's not. I don't mind it. Thank God we have stuff like Higher Learning to mix it up. So
exactly. And honestly, it feels like we're kind of shaking it up a bit, which I love.
Yeah. And on that note, though, we probably will be covering Hard Eyes in February as well. So that's
one I'm dragging my girlfriend to. I've already told her to prep for the Valentine's Day themed slasher that I'll be taking her to around Valentine's Day. So I'm excited for that, and that'll be our second new release. It seems that we'll have a good momentum going into the new year. That's one thing that we wanted to do a little bit more, is cover that new releases, and we've done that so far with Wolfman, and that definitely looks like it'll be the next one shaping up to make an episode out of, and I'm looking forward to that. And then as we get into the spring and summer, some more bigger blockbusters like our show gets its namesake from.
we promise to mix it up. It won't just be horror movies.
But on that note, guys, I think that summarizes episode 224 of Back to the Blockbuster. Thank you so much for joining us on this recap of Higher Learning's 30th anniversary. If you guys like John Singleton, I think this movie gets recommendation from both of us. Gaius, great pick as always. And thanks for having me on here to chat about movies. And guys, I know we kind of gave a little plug to Good Pods, where we've been featured as #1 in the film review chart. By all means, if you're familiar with that site, or even if you're not, guys can check us out there. Give some love to Good Pods. If you guys listen to us on Playlist, continue to do so. Much love for them. They are our network, and you guys can find the Playlist Studio app on any device that you use. And of course, there's always the good old Apple Music and Spotify. You guys can find Back to the Blockbuster there too. Wherever you guys get your podcasts, make sure you check us out there. If you guys have friends that love movies, who want to hear two guys ramble on about their favorites, by all means, recommend Back to the Blockbuster. We have 224 episodes for you guys to check out. So thanks for tuning into another one. And we will see you on the next one. And have a great February, guys.